Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're gonna be reacting to
Why the UK has higher inflation than the EU and US.
This video is brought to you by Ground News. If there's one thing we've all learnt over the past couple of years, it's that inflation isn't fun, for politicians and electorates alike. Nonetheless, towards the end of last year, there was some hope that the UK was through the worst of it, as inflation came back down to the Bank of England's 2% target and interest rates finally started to fall. However, in the past couple of months, inflation has apparently returned with a vengeance, rising from about 2% to a recent high of 3.5% in April, according to the latest data. Not only is this well above the bank's target, it's also well above the inflation rate that similar-sized economies are experiencing. So, in this video, we thought we'd take a look at why inflation is still so high in the UK. What you need to know in the description. Obviously, we saw a spike in 2021 and 2022, with the year-on-year inflation rate peaking at 11.1% in October 2022,
That's crazy,
as a post-pandemic
11%,
spike in
wow.
demand and Ukraine-related disruption to energy supplies pushed up prices across the globe. However, thanks to both a general stabilising of energy prices and a series of demand-dampening interest rate hikes from the Bank of England, which raised its benchmark rate from 0.1% in 2021 to a high of 5.25% in 2023, inflation fell throughout 2023 and 24, reaching the Bank of England's target rate of 2% in May of last year, before falling to a recent low of 1.7% in September. At about the same time, the UK was posting some impressively strong quarterly growth figures, which is why we were doing videos like this one. However, in the past couple of months, inflation has returned with a vengeance. After falling to 1.7% in September, the year-on-year inflation rate has steadily ticked up over the past 6 months or so, and actually came in at a 15-month high of 3.5% in April. This implies a month-on-month increase in prices of
3.5%. It doesn't seem that high when they had just 11%. I mean, clearly not moving in in the right direction. You don't want it high, but it's not like tragic.
1.2%, up from 0.3% in March and the highest in 2 years. This is both well above the Bank of England's 2% target and above the inflation rate in similar economies. In the US, for instance, inflation is currently running at 2.3%, despite Trump's tariffs and a depreciating dollar. In Germany, it's 2.1%, in Italy, it's 1.7%, and in France, it's just 0.7%. Nor is this just a passing blip. In fact, in its quarterly report published last month, the Bank of England said it expects inflation to remain around
in
here.
France is very low.
I don't know. Maybe there's a video about, but from how I understand it, very low inflation is not good either. Like there needs to be inflation for economic growth, but so maybe the target set at 2%, maybe that's the inflation you need to have. So maybe like 1.8% to 2% is like the optimal goal. Because how I understand it is when there isn't inflation, that means the economy is not growing. So
Here for much of 2025, and even go up to a peak of 3.7%. This is one of the reasons that interest rates have come down slower in the UK than in, say, the Eurozone. The Bank of England has cut rates 4 times in the past year or so, with its benchmark rate going from 5.25% to 4.25%, while the European Central Bank has cut rates 7 times, going from 4% to 2.25%. So, what's going on here? Why is inflation not only rising again, but so much higher than in peer economies? Well, as we see it, there are at least 4 reasons. The first and probably most significant reason is energy. Much of the recent increase in inflation has been driven by rising energy costs, thanks to the recent increase in the energy price cap, which essentially provides a price ceiling for the average household energy bills. The price cap changes every 3 months or quarter, and the 6.4% increase we saw in the second quarter, taking the annual bill for a typical household from £1,738 to £1,849, kicked in April, pushing up inflation for that month. While the price cap is expected to fall back down to £1,720 in the third quarter, that's still above where it was last year, and well above what it was before the 2022 energy crisis. So, what's going on here? Why are energy prices still so high? Well, quite a lot of this has to do with the fact that the UK's energy system is conspicuously reliant on imported natural gas, and gas actually determines British electricity prices more than 90% of the time, because under the UK's marginal pricing system, the most expensive source of energy determines the final price. Unfortunately for the UK, while they've come down a fair bit since 2022, gas prices are still way above their historic average. For context, UK gas prices have been hovering around 100 pence per therm for the past couple of months, well down from the unprecedented highs we saw after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but still about double the pre-pandemic average. Anyway, the second reason inflation is high.
When there was Putin invasion of Ukraine, the for them, they started to really feel it because they weren't able to get gas from Russia at that time.
Yeah,
There was a
because
stall.
not that there was a stall, there was sanctions.
Just
So
sanctions.
the countries, they purposefully sanction Russia, not buy gas from them,
Mm-hmm.
or they were supposed to do so, but we still see some countries are still buying the gas. So when that's like one of the sanctions, to not buy gas, and of course by doing so they hurt themselves, which we knew it would happen, because if that's where you need your gas from. But they decided to take that risk
There's
to
no
make a stand.
there's no alternate source.
There is, because they still have gas, so they import it
Yeah.
from somewhere, but it's probably more
It's
expensive.
expensive.
Yeah.
higher than we might like is housing. While inflation has cooled off across most of the economy, rent prices have been rising pretty steadily since 2022, with year-on-year rent inflation peaking at 7.8% in January. While this has come down a bit since then, it still came in at 6.3% in April, well above the average inflation rate. Homeowners have seen a similar rise in housing costs, i.e. mortgage payments and council tax, which the Office for National Statistics lists as owner-occupied costs. According to the ONS, owner-occupied costs are up 6.9% year-on-year, in large part because interest rates have come down relatively slowly and house prices have stayed surprisingly high. The third reason on our list is food. Year-on-year food inflation, excluding alcoholic beverages, came in at 3.4% in April, the highest level in 15 months, driven by particularly steep increases in the cost of chocolate, butter, and coffee. The fourth and final reason is wages. It might not feel like it to some of our viewers, but wage growth is still pretty strong in the UK, with annual pay increasing by 5.6% year on year in the first quarter of 2025, well above the 3 to 3.5% level that the Bank of England considers consistent with its 2% inflation target, assuming 1 to 1.5% productivity growth. Nominal wage growth has been hovering around 5% for the past 18 months or so, implying real wage growth, i.e. wage growth accounting for inflation, of about 2%. While this only just makes up for the real wage losses that workers suffered in 2022 and 2023, when inflation was running far higher than wages, higher wages mean more spending, which means higher prices. The government has also contributed to price pressures by increasing the national minimum wage by 16%, and the national living wage, which is paid to over 21s, by 6.7% in April. Again, we're not at all
Oh, so there is a separate minimum wage for like under 21s and over 21s? That's so
Never heard of
interesting.
that.
Well, that's how he explained it, that the national living wage is for over 21s, which I'm assuming over 21-year-olds. I guess the logic is because by that point you move out, so you need more money, versus minimum wage, like you work, like 18 through 10, you work, but you still kind of live with your parents. That's so interesting.
Yes, I don't know if you can even base it off that because you could be very young and live on your own.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, that's so interesting.
suggesting
Maybe you have to prove if you have bills in your name or something like that. If you have like a lease in your name, that's interesting.
that this is a bad policy, but it will have had an effect on inflation, especially given that the lowest paid workers spend most of their income. Nonetheless, even if wages are having some effect on inflation, there doesn't seem to be any real risk of a wage price spiral, and the best way out would probably be a reduction in housing and energy costs. If you want to know more about this topic, there's
Interesting.
Guys, of course, let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord, and as always, share as much kindness as possible.